Nikola Tesla. If you don't know who he is, you're either living under a rock or have never turned on a light bulb in your life. Tesla was an eccentric inventor who made some of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century. He was like a mad scientist, but without the hunchback or the evil laugh. Tesla was obsessed with the number 3. He would often stay up all night and only sleep for 3 hours. Oh, and he had a thing for pigeons. Specifically, he would only feed them in multiples of 3. But Tesla's quirks didn't stop him from making incredible contributions to science and technology. He invented the alternating current motor, which is still widely used today to power up everything, from cars to washing machines. And he also designed the Tesla coil, a high-voltage electrical transformer that is now a staple of science demonstrations and amusement park rides. Tesla was also a bit of a showman. He famously lit up Chicago World Fair in 1893 with a demonstration of his AC system, which outshone Thomas Edison's DC system. And he once claimed to have invented a death ray that could shoot down airplanes from a distance, although there's no evidence that he ever actually built it. Despite some of his more eccentric ideas, Tesla was a true genius and left an incredible legacy. So the next time you turn on a light switch or crank up the AC, remember that you have Nikola Tesla to thank for making it all possible. In 1896, Henri Becquerel, a physicist, made the accidental discovery that uranium salts generate some sort of rays. This intrigued him somewhat, but he wasn't sure that further study of the phenomenon was the greatest use of his time. So Marie Curie, his most gifted pupil, was given the assignment of figuring out what was going on. Such chances didn't present themselves too often to Curie. In 1891, she enrolled at a covert flying university in France because there were no official higher education options for women in her home Poland. Together with her husband Pierre, Curie discovered the elements polonium and radium and demonstrated that some kinds of rocks emit large amounts of energy without altering in any discernible way. The first of Curie's 2 Nobel Prizes was awarded for this amazing discovery, which could have made her extremely wealthy had she opted to patent her work, rather than make the results of her study openly available. Anyone who wants to read her notebooks must put on protective gear and sign a liability waiver. Her notes are so radioactively contaminated that touching them might be lethal for another 1,500 years. This famous bard has become such an integral part of Western culture that it's tempting to assume we must know a great deal about his life. But the reality is quite the opposite. He was certainly born in Stratford-upon-Avon in England, but the exact date is a matter of some conjecture. There are huge swathes of time where he disappears from the records, and we have no idea where he was or what he was doing. It's not even entirely certain what he looked like. The popular image of Shakespeare is based on 3 main portraits throughout history. 2 of these were produced years after his death, and the other probably isn't a depiction of Shakespeare at all. His works are regarded to be amongst the finest, if not the finest works of literature in the English language. Shakespeare was by no means the only famous playwright of his era, but his work has stood the test of time in the way that others have not. Few people are now familiar with the plays of Ben Jonson or Christopher Marlowe. Fewer still have seen them performed, while his rivals are now little more than historical footnotes. Shakespeare's even more famous and celebrated in death than he was in life. With an estimated 4 billion copies of his work having been sold, he ranks as the best-selling fiction author of all time. Nicolaus Copernicus was a Renaissance astronomer, mathematician, and all-around cool guy. He's best known for his theory that the sun, not the Earth, was at the center of the universe. This was a pretty big deal at the time, as everyone thought the Earth was the center of everything. But Copernicus said, "Guys, trust me on this one." He went to university and studied math and astronomy, which probably were some of the most exciting things you could learn back in the day. He also worked as a church canon, which was probably less cool, but still pretty important. Anyway, back to his research. Copernicus spent a long time studying the movements of the planets and the stars, and eventually came to the conclusion that everything revolved around the sun. This was a huge breakthrough in the field of astronomy, and it paved the way for future discoveries by other cool dudes like Galileo and Kepler. Unfortunately, Copernicus didn't live to see his theory become widely accepted, as he died in 1543. But his legacy lives on, and he's remembered as one of the greatest scientists of all time. So, if you ever feel like you're not cool enough, just remember that you'll never be as cool as Nicolaus Copernicus. Voltaire was a true jack of all trades. Not only was he a philosopher and writer, but he also dabbled in politics, science, and even invented a new type of watch. He famously declared, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Voltaire believed that people should be free to express their opinions, even if those opinions were unpopular or controversial. He saw censorship and repression of free speech as a threat to individual liberty and a barrier to progress and enlightenment. He was a champion of free speech, but did you know he was also a bit of a troublemaker? It's true. In fact, he once got thrown in prison for insulting a nobleman. He was such a savage with his insults that it landed him behind bars. But he didn't let that stop him. He continued to write and speak his mind, even in the face of persecution, often using humor and satire to make his points. His most famous work, Candide, is a hilarious and absurd tale of a young man who gets into all sorts of ridiculous situations. Through Candide's adventures, Voltaire skewers religious and philosophical optimism and exposes the absurdity and cruelty of human behavior. He reminds us that it's never too late to try something new and pursue our passions, even if it means stirring up a little trouble along the way. Voltaire's ideas and values are grounded in a commitment to reason and continue to be influential to this day. Newton's groundbreaking work, Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, laid the foundation for classical physics and contains his laws of motion and the law of universal gravitation. These laws explain the motion of objects in space and how they are affected by gravitational forces. In addition to his work in mathematics and physics, Newton was also a prolific astronomer who made significant contributions to the study of light and optics. He discovered that white light is composed of many different colors and invented the first practical reflecting telescope. Aside from his scientific pursuits, Newton was also a man of many interests, including alchemy and religion. He was a devout Christian and wrote extensively on religion and spirituality, though much of his work was not published until after his death. Despite criticism from his peers and the public, Newton's legacy remains as one of the greatest minds in the history of science. His laws of motion and universal gravitation continue to be studied and incorporated into modern physics, and his contributions continue to inspire new generations of scientists and researchers. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the legendary composer who could write a symphony before breakfast and still have time for a round of croissants and coffee, was a musical genius like no other. But don't let his fancy powdered wig fool you. Mozart was a rebel. By the time he was 5 years old, he could play the harpsichord, violin, and piano, and he was already composing his own music. And here you are, thinking your kid is talented because they can tie their own shoes. He could write music that would make your heart sing, your toes tap, and your brain explode with jealousy. But despite his musical genius, Mozart had a bit of a wild side. He was known for his love of parties, drinking, and practical jokes. And he even had a pet starling that he taught to sing one of his melodies. He was a true icon of his time and a shining example of what can be achieved with dedication, perseverance, and a good sense of humor. He may have died over 200 years ago, but his music and legacy live on. Born out of wedlock and with no formal education, the young Da Vinci seemed destined for a life of anonymous drudgery. In Renaissance Italy, there was little social mobility. The right family name and connections were invaluable. Da Vinci had neither, but he was not a man who would blend into the background to be forgotten by history. Flamboyantly dressed, a strict vegetarian, enormously physically strong, and rumored to be gay in an age when homosexuality could be punished by death, it was nonetheless the workings of Da Vinci's remarkable mind that truly set him apart. In an age renowned for producing an abundance of great artists, Da Vinci is regarded as one of the greatest of them all, yet painting was by no means his only talent. He studied geometry, mathematics, anatomy, botany, architecture, sculpture, and designed weapons of war for the kings, princes, and barons who struggled for wealth and power in Italy's warring city-states. Leonardo is widely regarded to have been a genius who epitomized the Renaissance humanist ideal, and his collective works comprise a contribution to later generations of artists, matched only by that of his younger contemporary, Michelangelo. Albert Einstein was a brilliant physicist who had a knack for sticking his tongue out in photos. He developed the theory of relativity, which explains how time and space are connected. This is helpful for when you're running late to a meeting and need an excuse that involves the curvature of space-time. Einstein was also instrumental in the development of the atomic bomb during World War II, although he later regretted his involvement in the project and became an advocate for peace. He famously wore the same outfit every day, claiming that it saved him time and energy. And he really didn't like wearing socks. He thought they were too confining and itchy. So he often went without them and let his toes wiggle freely in his shoes. In addition to his scientific work, Einstein was also a prolific writer and philosopher, and his ideas on topics such as religion, politics, and morality continue to influence people today. Despite his many accomplishments, the man with a set of hair just as iconic as his brain was also known for being absent-minded. Legend has it that he once forgot his own address and had to phone his wife to ask where he lived. In the end, Einstein's legacy will always be remembered as one of the greatest scientific minds in history. And hey, if you ever need to style your hair in a pinch, you know who to turn to for inspiration. It is said that European philosophy is best characterized as a series of footnotes to Plato. While this might perhaps be something of a stretch, it gives an indication of the esteem in which the ancient Greek philosophers held even to this day. Plato's efforts to understand the world around him covered metaphysics, ethics, politics, aesthetics, perception, and the nature of knowledge itself. Despite having been written more than 2,000 years ago, his work remains eminently readable today. Plato didn't deal in dry, tedious treatise. He preferred to bring his work to life, teasing out thoughts and ideas in the form of a dialogue between characters. This in itself was a remarkably innovative approach. Plato blurred the lines between philosophy and entertainment and challenged the reader to scrutinize their own beliefs. Thank you for watching. If you want to support this channel and have a say in the topic of the next video, check out the Patreon link in the description.